In 1998 and 1999, Michael Sheen played the vulgar young composer Mozart in a performance that prompted one critic to observe, "This actor is so luminous it's scary." 2 decades later, he is returning to the same play, Amadeus, this time playing Antonio Salieri,
the death of Mozart,
the envious court composer in Vienna, who is murderously enraged when he is confronted by Mozart's genius. Michael Sheen, Shemai?
Ah, Shemai.
When Wolfgang Mozart died at just 35, only 5 people attended his funeral, and one of them was Antonio Salieri, the character who accuses himself at the opening of Amadeus of killing him. Somehow that real-life story sums up the quite complex character Peter Shaffer has created as Mozart's rival of this story. How do you feel about Salieri and what drives him?
Well, I've had a long time to think about it, because I first did this play 23 years ago when I played Mozart. And so now coming back to it, I've been fascinated by the sort of contradictions in the character, really, and how much he is both repulsed and attracted by Mozart. In a way, Mozart, I think, holds a mirror up to Salieri. And so everything he feels about Mozart is sort of about himself, I think, in all kinds of ways. He is revealed to himself, and I think he's someone who has not really had a very close relationship with himself for a long time. So one of the words that really jumps out of the play for me is need. He talks about hearing, the first time he hears Serenade for Woodwinds by Mozart, the thing that kind of absolutely rocks his world and shifts his universe, he believes that he hears God's need in the sound.
Because he's not at all two-dimensional, isn't he? He's not just an evil villain.
Well, he's certainly human. In terms of his relationship to God, it's a sort of relationship on paper. If he sort of, I think he sort of goes, well, I tick lots of boxes. I've lived like this and I've done these things, and therefore I am a good person. What his inner life is doesn't seem to come into play. It doesn't matter what foul thoughts he's had or what wickedness may be in him or any of that sort of stuff. And the way he describes God in the opening is that God is a God of bargains. It's transactional. And again, Mozart comes along and just rips up all the rules. He says, well, goodness cannot make you a good composer. Was Mozart good? Goodness is nothing in the furnace of art. And I suppose part of what drew me to coming to do this play again at this point in my life and career as well is, I think Salieri, there's a moment in the play that is usually a very throwaway moment, but it's become quite an important moment for me, which is when there's a very funny scene where Salieri writes a little welcome march in Mozart's honor, and then Mozart kind of copies it and then kind of riffs on it kind of incredibly and does extraordinary things and changes it and then says to Salieri at the end of it, do you want to have a go? Do you want to try something? Sort of like a jazz musician going, okay, this is fun, let's have a go. And Salieri at that moment could choose, I suppose, to go, you know what, yes, I'm going to give up all my respectability and the life I've got and the career, and I'm going to devote myself to going back to the joy of the music and to try and become a better composer and live up to the ideals of my young self. But he doesn't. He can't do that.
As you mentioned, you played Mozart in the late 1990s. He's a different sort of quandary, isn't he? How did you approach playing him?
Well, the key to playing Mozart for me was the idea of someone who is strapped to a meteorite hurtling through space and is doing whatever he can just to deal with it. So all his personality stuff, the stuff that everybody else is sort of offended by or appalled by, is kind of like a release for him, because he has this nuclear fission going on inside. It's like a sun burning inside of him. This God's need, whatever it is, this divine thing that he is a vessel for, is destroying him. It's burning him up, and to get it out, to get all this stuff out, it's someone who is just hanging on for sheer life. But as he gets older and life doesn't adapt for him, Little does he know that Salieri's making sure that life doesn't adapt for him. He just can't cope with it anymore, and it burns him up and it destroys him. The same thing that was the positive energy in his life becomes the negative energy in his life. So that was the key to it for me. And it is fascinating because as I'm playing Salieri, I have the ghost of my Mozart in my head still.
This production at the Sydney Opera House sounds like it's really immense. You've got singers and an orchestra. It must be a very different mix and presence of music on the stage. How does that work?
Having the music at all is, it's like having some sort of wild animal in the room with you. You know, it's very hard to put your mind or focus on anything else because it's just so alive. And so you sort of, you know, it's a careful balance with that anyway. But having a live orchestra and live opera singers as well, I mean, hearing the noise, the sound that comes out of an opera singer, for anyone who's ever stood close by, it's quite an extraordinary thing. And in fact, there's one section when Salieri hears this Serenade for Woodwinds for the first time, and he gets to describe listening to it as it's playing.
The oboe.
The oboe note, yes. It's an extraordinary thing because it feels as an actor like you're doing a duet with Mozart somehow, or with the orchestra, you know, and that's an extraordinary experience. I've acted with orchestras before, but never in that way.
Well, the music is really the other major character in the play. What was your association with Mozart's music before you first encountered the play 25 years ago?
So when I came to do the play the first time, listening to that music again, fresh, and with the experience of the character in the play to kind of inform it, found it just incredibly moving, really, you know, and confusing, I suppose, in some ways as well, and realizing that this all came out of one man who died so young, and what else might he have produced, you know, and it was extraordinary. So, and again, now coming to the play again in this way, because I'm hearing it now through the ears of envy in some ways, or the ears of insecurity maybe, and that's interesting to have to explore my own sense of insecurity and professional jealousy or artistic creative jealousy and insecurity at this point in my life is really interesting.
Michael Sheen, thanks so much for talking to us.
Pleasure.